Something flew widely under the radar a couple of days ago that I wanted to take a look at. It's a piece by vulture.com, and this is actually very interesting. It was very well researched, and it's about movie reviews and how easily manipulatable they are. How easy it is to actually take a movie critic, pay them under the table, and get a positive or negative review, depending on what you want, without that going reported. Now, a lot of people know that the Federal Trade Commission has guidelines that make it so that people like me, when I talk about something, we need to disclose that it is a advertisement. I've taken advertisements before. I am always careful with them. I will admit there are elements of them, like, so for example, there are times where I have advertised mobile games. And you know what? I've played those mobile games for a bit. I thought they were kind of fun. And then I just kind of moved on, and that's about it, right? I'm not saying anything bad about them. It's just, I'm not really a huge mobile gamer. When I advertise something, I'm looking at it and I'm making sure, okay, well, do I dislike this? Because if I actually dislike this thing, I'm not going to feel good even promoting it to anyone. But do I find this kind of fun, kind of enjoyable? What do I think about it overall? Okay, well, we talk about it. Maybe it's a game, maybe it's a book, maybe it's whatever. And I'm very careful to always address, hey, this is a paid promotion. Hey, this is this thing. Do with that what you will. I would never want to take money for a review in terms of taking money to give a positive or negative review score to something, because that's something I take seriously. I find these scores very arbitrary and stupid, but at the end of the day, when I tell you an opinion of do I like this thing or do I not like this thing and why, that's important to me that those seem transparent, right? When I make a movie review, whether 1,000 people are going to see it or it ends up being seen by 20,000 people, which has happened a couple times, to me, it's very important that I'm honest. But it's not that way when money is involved for a lot of people. I'm not trying to say that in a way of like, look how righteous I am. I'm just trying to say that for me, those kinds of interactions with an audience where someone is willing to look at your opinion and say, wow, you know, I align a lot with this person's views, or maybe I don't. Well, let's hear them out. Okay, that's well reasoned. People who are willing to do that for me and my opinions, I'm very careful that I don't abuse that. And when things are paid, I really, really, really try and make 100% certain that people know, hey, this was an advertisement. I wanted to tell you about this mobile game or this whatever. If you want to play it, here you go. Here's the option. There's no gun to your head, but it's up to you. And now I can use that money to fund a project. It's cool. Mutually beneficial for everyone, and you go your separate ways. But it's above table. And Vulture pointed out that there are a lot of Rotten Tomatoes scores being actually manipulated below table, under the table, in order to change these movie scores. There was a ridiculous metric that essentially in early 2011, I believe, according to different companies and platforms, that basically Rotten Tomatoes got something like 30 million unique users a month that were actually viewing it. There have been people who have thrown around basically statements like a fourth of moviegoers in the United States will literally look at Rotten Tomatoes before seeing a movie. So if that's the case, this is actually a big deal. The report has basically claimed that this group, Bunker 15, who offers innovative media planning, editorial support, social media advisement, and more, has been paying for essentially fringe reviewers, smaller reviewers who are part of the overall pool that goes into critical review percentage on Rotten Tomatoes to manipulate scores on the website. Now, what's interesting about this is something that people have been saying for years. People have been, kind of memeing about it, but like, oh, critics are paid off to hate this, or critics are paid off to like this. And for some reason, people treat it like the flat earth theory. People will laugh at this comment. People will say, well, that's not true. Where's the proof? Where's this? Where's that? And anytime somebody pointed to an example of like, this math doesn't add up, people would say, oh, well, you're just biased because you like that movie and you're upset that it got a good score or a bad score, or you don't like that movie and you're upset it got a good score. And it would kind of just become this circle jerk thing where I feel like a lot of people hate critics just in general. And a lot of people, for some reason, really idolize their opinion. Like, oh, wow, it got this critical score. It's basically the nectar of the gods. For me, critical opinion doesn't really matter very much. I went to literary school basically to be an English teacher, and I had to learn a lot of different things about story, whether it be framing elements, whether it be metaphorical meaning, whether it be, grammatical things. Basically, I had to go to school for like 5 years, if you add up everything that I did, and I have a pretty extensive background in literature. During that, you kind of do have to do some film studying. But you know what? My opinion isn't necessarily any more relevant or honestly right than somebody who's a high school graduate who might have a better grasp on certain things than I do. I'm not exactly a genius, and that's something that I realize of myself, having a higher education and actually more than one college degree. And of course, because of that, I realize that that's the case for all of these people, right? I mean, you can have accomplished film directors even that have a backwards opinion on something, that other actors who will be just as accomplished as the director will come out and say that's silly. Look at someone like Quentin Tarantino. I really like Quentin Tarantino's work, a lot of it, but he has opinions on superhero movies that even accomplished actors like Samuel L. Jackson will say, hey, look, I've won awards, I've done X, Y, and Z, and I don't agree with that. So even when you have these people at the top of their craft, opinions will still vary. What's always been important to me is how you back those opinions up, how you actually justify them, and, basically how you got there. Even if I disagree with you, if I can at least tell how you got there and I can respect the thought process, that's really what matters to me. But with this whole sort of thing, this is essentially taking fringe people on the edge of what counts. People who are critics, but they're smaller in their field. They're not Roger Ebert or whatever. They're not up here at the top of their game with like the top 20 critics where it's like, wow, people know that guy's name. He actually matters. I would argue that film criticism has gone away from that when it comes to big name critics. I think a lot of the bigger known names now are actually people on YouTube, not me, but people who specialize in film criticism or review, not people who just make it, once or twice a month like I do, but people who actually have like a big presence, like Chris Stuckman. People know who Chris Stuckman is. He's one of the biggest movie reviewers on this platform. I would argue most people know who Chris Stuckman is over most of these people on Rotten Tomatoes. And so it's kind of interesting that there are definitely fans and definitely people who are just normal people. I believe now Chris Stuckman actually went to film school, but he started out as a normal old guy, right? Who have a lot of input and have a lot of opinion that does have sway, whether it's on Rotten Tomatoes or not, by just reviewing something on YouTube. Moist Critical, Penguin Zero, that's somebody that I really respect. Charlie, I like his work. I like the videos that he makes. He's just a chill, down-to-earth dude who talks about stuff. I've always really enjoyed his channel. There's been absolutely times I've disagreed with his opinion on something, but I respect it, and I like to listen to how he got there. I'd argue that he has a lot more sway with the amount of audience members he has than a lot of people do on Rotten Tomatoes. So I'm not trying to say that maybe a few of these critics don't matter at all, but I'm also saying that I think on their own, it's not as much of a problem if you have one person paid off here or there. It's dishonest, but it's not as much of a problem until you get to the fact that Rotten Tomatoes is a review aggregator. It aggregates these reviews. It basically takes it and it says, okay, 9 people said this was positive, 1 said it was negative, 90%. That's what it does. And a lot of people don't understand this. A lot of people think that it means, well, basically this film got a 9 out of 10 in terms of quality, like it got an A-. No, it means 90% of people, of critics, thought it was a good film. Or when it comes to viewers, 90% of them thought it was a good film, 10% didn't like it, didn't connect with it, or said X, Y, or Z that was negative about it. Okay, here we go. But what's interesting about this is that the more you actually mess with this, the more it actually starts to barely kind of move it around just a little bit. So a good example of this was actually Ophelia, this movie with Daisy Ridley. I really like Daisy Ridley. She obviously has nothing to do with it. I'm just telling you that she was in the movie. And what's interesting about this is Vulture broke it down very well. I would say read their full article if you're interested in this. But one thing that they talked about with this is that between October of 2018 and January of 2019, Rotten Tomatoes added 8 review scores to Ophelia's score. 7 of those were favorable, and most came from critics who have reviewed at least one other Bunker 15 movie. The writer of a negative review says that Bunker 15 lobbied them to change it. If the critic wanted to give it a barely overall positive review, then I do know the editors at Rotten Tomatoes and can get it switched, a Bunker 15 employee wrote. I also discovered another negative review of Ophelia from this period that was not counted by Rotten Tomatoes, by a writer whose positive reviews of other Bunker 15 movies have been recorded by the aggregator. Ophelia climbed the tomato meter to 62%, flipping from rotten to fresh. The next month, the distributor IFC Films announced that it had acquired Ophelia for release in the US. Then Ophelia's production company, Covert Media, did not return requests for comment. Bunker 15's founder, Daniel Harlow, says, "Wow, you are really reaching there," and disagrees with the suggestion that his company buys reviews to skew Rotten Tomatoes. Upon rereading this article as well, I do think it would be worth you checking out, but it's actually very interesting because it's also implied here that it was suggested essentially that reviewers, as suggested by Bunker 15 representatives according to this article, that basically reviewers were being encouraged to also, if they published a negative review of one of these movies, to put that review on a smaller blog, essentially quarantining the review so that it did not affect the overall positivity of the Rotten Tomatoes review. Essentially something like, hey, go ahead and have your review if it's negative, but just don't share it with Rotten Tomatoes unless it's positive, then do. And that's definitely manipulation of the system if that's true. Like, that's just point blank manipulating the system. That's like saying, yeah, show up to to vote, but only if you're going to vote for this guy. If you're not going to vote for this guy, maybe you just shouldn't come to the polls, because at least then you're not hurting us. That's pretty much what they're doing here, but with movie reviews, to essentially say, hey, look, we want these movie reviews to be positive, so either don't vote at all or vote positive. If this is true, that's what they're doing here, and that's a pretty big claim. That's pretty nuts if so. What's interesting about this, though, is that this is pretty much a thing that we knew. Even if you don't want to take the Bunker 15 situation as like it for sure happened, because there are a lot of different allegations with it, it's interesting that a lot of people have moved away from reading critical work. You know what's interesting too is even Quentin Tarantino, who I actually used as an example earlier, who's a very accomplished movie director, has said that he no longer reads critics' work, and he said that I don't know anybody basically in film criticism. So it's interesting to me because basically people in Hollywood are moving away from caring about critical reception. They don't like it, but it's also very incentivized to get at the very least a passable Rotten Tomatoes score. It's incentivized to get at least a fresh, right? It doesn't have to be a 90%, but if you can at least avoid that smashed tomato icon of like greenness, you basically want to, because that means that your movie is not hot ass or garbage, according to people who look at the website. And what's interesting too is that filmmaker Paul Schrader in this piece said the studios didn't invent Rotten Tomatoes and most of them don't like it, but the system is broken, audiences are dumber, normal people don't go through reviews like they used to. Rotten Tomatoes is something the studios can game, so they do. So there's even people in Hollywood saying, yeah, Rotten Tomatoes is something that different people actually try and use in Hollywood, and they actually try to game the system in order to get you to see something. Basically, what they're trying to do is bank on the fact that you are busy. They're trying to bank on the fact that maybe you might sit down and you're not going to read through a bunch of reviews of a movie. You're going to say, well, I have these 3 movies to watch through. Which one do I want to watch through? Okay, well, this one got a 12% on Rotten Tomatoes. That's probably garbage. Oh, this one got a 20%. That's probably garbage. Oh, this one got a 61%, just basically 1% above what's needed for positive. Oh, it's fresh. Okay, well, that's good. And basically the idea is that people are so inundated with information, so bombarded all the time by their daily lives and by entertainment and text messages and social media and all this stuff that they will just glance at it. And then if the system is actually gamed to be positive, well, then they're more likely to see the movie. And, it does actually correlate with how movies do sometimes in theaters. There absolutely are movies that just do well, no matter what. And there are absolutely movies that are just kind of negatively seen by critics, but positively seen by, normal moviegoers. that do well. A lot of those Transformers movies, they are falling under that category. Most of them are negatively reviewed by critics, but people who watched them enjoyed them at the very least as a spectacle, so they did actually go and see them. What's frustrating to me about this is that this is something that I think a lot of people have suspected and known for a very long time, that people were trying to game this system, especially when it became an aggregate score. We saw this with social media personalities where they would be paid to basically talk about something, but they didn't used to disclose it, before the FTC guidelines, which I even think the FTC guidelines are a little silly sometimes in how they handle things, where some people don't have to disclose it, some do, depending on what the platform actually is. Also, there is the fact that a lot of people in other countries are not subject to the laws of another country. So if the United States Federal Trade Commission makes a rule, it's not like a social media influencer in China has to follow that rule. So obviously the fact that we don't all follow the same rules in general applies to this situation too. But I do find it interesting that people have been trying to point this out forever, that, hey, this system is gameable. This system is something you can mess with. This system is something that if you threw $500 at somebody and their review just happened to change, oh, look, all of a sudden the icon goes from rotten to positive, rotten to fresh. And now all of a sudden there's more people willing to check that movie out because they don't want to form their own opinion. They don't want to waste their time on something that is perceived as bad, so they'd rather just not watch it at all. Unfortunately, this is something that's happened with a lot of YouTube reviews as well, where people will just say, well, I saw this YouTuber say they didn't like the movie, so I'm just never going to see it. And they summarized, the movie in 10 minutes, so I'm the expert on it. And I think it's unfortunate that a lot of people are not willing to actually form their own opinions on stuff. And that's actively affecting things like box office. It's actively affecting, I think, the intelligence of audience members, because they don't know how to form their own opinions a lot of the times now. They know how to parrot people. And I think it's really just sad. I don't really know what the solution is. Rotten Tomatoes is not going anywhere. I'm not saying never look at it. I mean, I've looked at it before too, and I think it's an interesting barometer, but I don't think it's the be-all, end-all that some people act like it is. And I think that whether or not this particular instance ends up being true, with other people in Hollywood claiming that the website is manipulated by some people in order to get favorable results, it's pretty hard for me to argue with that and say, no, it's not. This is just a conspiracy theory. At this point, you even have people in Hollywood coming out and saying that this is something that happens, whether this particular instance is a full-on example of it or not, which it remains to be seen. I'm interested to hear what you think in the comments down below. I'm still kind of losing my voice back and forth. Now it's allergies, so it's just something's going on here. But I appreciate you watching this video. I appreciate my members and patrons. I want to leave a thank you here. So thank you all very much for helping to support this content. It means the world to me. I hope you all have a fantastic day. If you're interested, we do have another channel, Degenerate Plays, where we play through games podcast style, have fun, talk, and hang out with you. So I hope you'll check that out. Have a fantastic day, and as always, everyone, stay shui.